All right, welcome back to episode 19 of Give That Fan a Podcast. I'm Ryan. That's Paul. We have Ryan Ripken joining us this afternoon. We'll have him on in just a couple moments. But we're going to start off with, I guess, a little plea to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I think I mentioned last week, once we hit 100 subscribers on that, um, we can change the URL to something like youtube.com/give that fan a podcast, which would be awesome, as opposed to a random jumbling of letters and numbers. New YouTube channel just debuted last week, so we appreciate any support we get on there. In addition, you can find the audio versions on Utah Street Report and wherever you get your podcasts. Paul, we have a sponsor now. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I saw a little extra coin in my bank account the other day. I was like, what? Where did
Yeah,
that
not
come
bad,
from?
right? So, Give That Fan a Podcast is sponsored by Birdland Sports. Go ahead and pull up our little promo code here.
Nice.
Josh from Section 336, I'm sure many of you are familiar with their podcast. Josh has a great line of affordably priced Orioles-themed t-shirts available for purchase at birdlandstore.com. Their Tyler Wells-inspired player nickname designs are currently being rolled out, with Hillbilly Hayes and King of the Mount Castle already popular, and plenty more on the way, including, Paul, some Give That Fan a Podcast merch, which Josh has graciously offered to sell on our behalf. These are t-shirt designs for fans by fans. You can use promo code THATFAN at checkout for 20% off your purchase at birdlandstore.com. That's birdlandstore.com, promo code THATFAN. That's all one word at checkout for 20% off your purchase. Each purchase helps support Baltimore podcasts such as ours, so head on over to birdlandstore.com and enter promo code THATFAN for 20% off.
All right, let's get to it. Joining us now on Give That Fan a Podcast. His family is synonymous with Baltimore baseball. He is Ryan Ripken. He's live with us here on Give That Fan a Podcast. Ryan, good afternoon. How are you today, man?
I'm good, guys. Thanks for having me on. I know we've been trying to have this in the works, and finally it came to fruition. So glad to be on and be able to talk a little baseball with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we reached out to you. Paul and I just started doing this together. It was just me for a while, and then took a bit of a hiatus. And Paul agreed to be my co-host upon return. So we're excited to be back. Excited to have our first guest since returning, and we're thrilled that it's you.
I'm
So
honored to be the first one. So let's dive into it, guys.
let's do it. So my first question comes with a backstory, and you're relatively new to Twitter, so I'm sure you're unaware of this. A couple years ago, I tweeted out my Orioles Mount Rushmore, and my Orioles fan problems account, for those familiar with it, it's a lot of jokes. I do present some stats, some real analysis, things like that, but I joke around a lot. I tweeted a couple years ago that my Mount Rushmore of Orioles was Cal Ripken Sr., Cal Ripken Jr., Billy Ripken, and Ryan Ripken, which, of course, that's a testament to what your family name means to this organization, but it's also pretty clearly kind of tongue-in-cheek. Most people appreciated the joke. There was one guy in particular who started calling me a racist and a white supremacist because I didn't include guys like Eddie Murray. Kind of ridiculous, but that whole interaction with other fans chiming in kind of became one of my favorite nights on Orioles Twitter. It went down in history. But that brings me, since you're on our show, I think it's only fitting to ask you, what is your Mount Rushmore of Baltimore Orioles?
Oh gosh. Well, one, I didn't really know about that, so that's pretty hilarious.
It was a
You
great
know,
night.
yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm sure you got a lot of action, and that Twitter was definitely on fire that night. Personally, look, I'm going to exclude my dad from the Rushmore because he's dad, so get him out of there. But Eddie and Frank Robertson, Eddie Murray, obviously tremendous players, and what they did and what they accomplished, only so many people ever accomplished in the game. And then Jim Palmer was a big part of the success for the Orioles early on, and he continues to be involved with them. But and then Earl Weaver, obviously, and I know it's not fair to take. I know that my dad was a big part of the organization, but I do want people to realize and understand of these other accomplishments that Frank and Eddie and Jim and Earl, what they did was incredible. And even for a while, I think people forget, like, Harold Baines was on the team, obviously not the Mount Rushmore for the Orioles, but he did just get elected in the Hall of Fame in the recent years, and so there were some really good players that the Orioles have come by, and I certainly don't forget about those guys, which I'm sure most of the Oriole fans haven't either.
I will say Harold Baines, I used to love. I was one of those kids who would mimic batting stances at every family party, and Baines was one of my favorite with the bat real low behind his back, the high leg kick.
I feel like you had to. I feel like that was a staple. And people say that with my dad. Bainesy was definitely one of the guys that I tried to emulate pretty poorly, I must say.
Yeah, that swing was super sweet. I still remember a game where Mike Mussina started, and the Orioles got one hit, but it was a Harold Baines home run, and they won the game 1-0. And I just always remember that because Mussina was my favorite pitcher, and Harold
Mm-hmm.
Baines just had that sweet swing, and he was always just so damn good. So Harold Baines is a good one.
All right, so diving into a little bit more current discussion, there was a little debate among Orioles Twitter the other day, the second game of the White Sox series. Orioles were down by 2 in the seventh inning. Kendall Graveman comes in. He walks Rougned Odor on 4 pitches to load the bases for Jorge Mateo. None of those pitches to Odor were particularly close to the strike zone. Looked like he didn't really have a great feel for his release point when he came into the game. Mateo swings at the first pitch. It was a sinker that was breaking in off the plate toward his knees a little bit. Probably ball one, would have been a borderline call there. But he grounded into an inning-ending double play. He did hit the ball 105 miles an hour, and it took a spectacular play by Moncada down at third to prevent what probably would have been a bases-clearing double for Mateo. But there was some discourse over the swing decision in that instance. So I wanted to ask you, from a player standpoint, what's your approach going into the box with the bases loaded after a 4-pitch walk, or just after a 4-pitch walk in general? How do you feel about kind of the ambush tactic there?
So I think it really depends on the situation and the scenario. And in the at bat before with Odor, right, he was the guy that walked on 4 pitches. So for him, he's been having his ups and downs. He's going to try to wait to be able to essentially maybe pass it to the next guy. And so in this case, when it's bases loaded, I'm completely fine with the decision for Mateo to swing first pitch. He's confident in himself. He's swinging the bat really well. And to your point, Moncada made a very good play. Now, granted, it was a little bit more of a chopper, but he still hit 105. Moncada had to go to his right, make a play, handle the bag, and make a good throw. He accomplished all that as a big play. But if you remember a couple weeks or maybe the week prior, the Little League Classic, Mateo hits the ball down the line, probably on a similar pitch. He just doesn't get to it as cleanly against Graveman that he did. I forget who pitched against the Red Sox. So I'm fine with that completely. And it's also a scenario of the game. If you're down by 3 or more runs, or the if you're not coming to the plate to have the ability to tie the game, and maybe you're not swinging it as well, I get it to try to see a pitch, especially later. But bases loaded, I think it was a 1 or 2 run game at the time.
Down by
I
2,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, let him swing, because if that ball gets by, that's in the corner. That's 2 runs, maybe 3. I think just more impressive that Moncada made the play of the game.
There we go. I think my critics would agree with you. I think my reaction was a little knee jerk in the moment.
What's
My
that
my
like?
friend and I, every time. Oh, I know. Every time we're at a game, 4-pitch walk. He got mad at Adley the other day for swinging at the first pitch after I think 5 straight balls before him. He chased one up and out of the zone, ended up popping out, I believe. But um, yeah, I don't know. I obviously default to your experience as a player. I didn't play past the high school level. I'm relegated to beer league softball at this point, so I appreciate that input.
Well, and again, just to reiterate, and these guys are at this level, and it's really knowing yourself. And some coach, it's always going to be the what if. Either way that happens. If he gets a hit there, everyone's praising. If he doesn't, it's always going to have doubt. But in my mind, in that, it's knowing yourself, knowing the situation, and I'm sure more opportunities are to come up for Mateo. And I believe next time he could very well find a way to, what he has done recently, find a way to make a big play.
Yeah, he's been great as of late. So Ryan, you came to the organization at the beginning of the 2017 season after your tenure in the Nats farm system.
Mm-hmm.
The new regime with Mike Elias, Sig Mejdal, and the whole crew took over after the 2018 season, and obviously heavy focus on player development, analytics with the change in power there. In terms of the organization and the kind of tactics that they use to try to um, improve player development, analytics, all that kind of stuff. What changes did you notice at first, and then what kind of came about more gradually over time?
Well, initially when they came in, they wanted to try to feel out what was there and who they had in the system, and then they wanted to try to slowly implement more and more of their um, of their philosophies. Now, I will say, and it's still ringing true right now, the pitching aspect was always ahead of the hitting aspect, which, if you look at it in the game, pitching is always going to be ahead of hitting. But that was the initial thing when I saw in 2019, I believe was the first season that Elias and Sig and the rest of the group were having the full year with the major league team and with the minor league affiliates. And so I saw a lot of impact on the pitching side. And I don't know. I think just the analytics of seeing that they just are more advanced and you can try to pinpoint that more. The hard thing, because pitching dictates what happens. The pitchers are dictating what's coming to the plate. The hitters are reacting to it. Now, the last couple years, the Orioles then implemented more of their approach, things from the hitter side and approach, and they try to calculate as much data and analytics, and they try to work on swing decisions and a lot of that can for me it definitely it had frustrations for me because it was different. But when you look at it, I understand why they're doing it, because you want to try to give your hitters better ideas of pitches to swing at, try to let the borderline pitches go, um, and then try to have success. But as we've seen, a lot of the hitters in the minor leagues now for the Orioles, and there's a lot of talented players, are really doing well, which is a testament that what they're doing is working, and what they're focusing on is having success. Now, everyone complains though at the major league level, everything's thrown out of the window when you get to the major leagues, because the fact of the matter is hitting's going to come and go, but your pitching has to be on pitching has to be on for you to be consistent. And that's really why we're seeing what the Orioles are doing right now, is because of the groundwork the pitching set through the minors to this point in time. Sorry, I know that was a lot, but
No, hey,
um,
it's all right. You're the guest. We want you to talk as much as you'd like.
well,
Absolutely.
sometimes if you're like, yeah, back off, be quiet, all good.
If
I have
you
no
know
problem
anything
being quiet.
about this show, I'm the guy who every question Ryan asks me, I go on for about 5 to 10 minutes, and the next thing I know, I'm just rambling. So
It
you
it
are
was a
all
solid
good.
10-minute rant on Brandon Hyde last week. I had looked at the clock. I thought I timed it at about 6.5 minutes. I guess I didn't look at the very beginning because you definitely had some things to say there. But Ryan, your answer to that question leads me into one I had a little later on, and then I'll let Paul get into a couple of his questions as well. You talk about the pitching kind of has to be there every night. The hitting's going to come and go. We saw that in the Houston series. The Orioles scored 6 runs in 3 games, scored in a total of 3 different innings. Couple home runs in game 2, a 2-run homer by Arias in game 1, and then the ninth inning RBI single in game 3. But we saw some excellent starting pitching, specifically Kyle Bradish, 8 shutout innings on Friday. Dean Kramer almost got through 8 innings on Saturday, and then Austin Voth pitched into the 7th, gave up that 1 run that was inherited by Brian Baker and ended up scoring. And Spencer Watkins has been pitching well in addition to those guys. Didn't see him in this past series. Jordan Lyles, we know what we get from him. The starting pitching has been their peripheral stats are not very good, but the results have been there. What do you see that's working for these guys?
Well, so it kind of all ties back into, I think there's no coincidence that when Adley got called up, that definitely boosted the whole pitching staff, that they were having some success, but when he came up, there was it solidified what they were trying to do. And Adley calls a good game, and he gives them confidence to throw any pitch up there. Now, as far as individually for those guys, for the starting pitching, it was really trying to get your footing. And so for a guy like Kyle Bradish, who it's his rookie year, and I think people need to recognize that some of these guys you're trying to make your adjustments as you go. Kyle has unbelievable stuff, and I've seen it firsthand. His thing is getting behind in counts, or if he gets ahead in counts, not being able to put guys away and maybe leaving a mistake pitch. But usually it's those things, or he just will walk some guys on, and as we know, walks are issues. But what's making the Orioles starting pitcher so effective is that they're filling up the zone. They are being efficient with their outings recently. I mean, even Jordan Lyles in the White Sox series, he gave up 7 or 8 hits, I believe, but he was able to grind, be efficient. I think he threw 95 pitches and 70 were strikes. So being able to be that efficient with your pitching is important. And make no mistake, though, The bullpen has been unbelievable. So the fact that there's been a couple falters with the bullpen as of recently, minus Felix Batista, um, the starting pitching coming alive it's at the right time because the bullpen needed a rest. So to see the Dean Kramers and the Bradishes and Spencer and Laz, all those guys give the effort that they have is going to help the team in the long run, but it's also showing people that um, what the Orioles are doing and what these players are doing, they are willing to adapt and they're doing a tremendous job in a very, very tough American League East and playing the Houston Astros, obviously, this past weekend.
So
Go ahead, Paul.
we've seen that with the Orioles for different stretches throughout the season that their offense has been a little bit waning at times, and again they're facing great pitchers in that Houston Astros series, no doubt, but the offense was lagging to say the least this past series. We've been hearing all these rumors that Gunnar Henderson may be coming up, and we don't know that it could be Westberg, it could be somebody that we haven't even been talking about that could be coming up this week. Does the Orioles front office, if they know that they're looking to promote a young prospect like a Gunnar Henderson, do they have that conversation with him where they say, hey, we want to bring you up on this particular date, this is what we're trying to work on with, or is it as much a surprise to the prospect as it is to us when they get called up?
Well, yeah, they're definitely not having the conversation of this is the day you're getting called up, or this is the thing is we all know the time is coming, and I bet for Gunnar he understands that, but they're not telling him when it's going to be. But when they're moving him around positions in the minors, that's another example of, and even the manager Buck Britton down there is probably saying, hey, they want you to play other positions because they want you to be prepared. Your time's coming, but I don't know exactly when. Mm-hmm. So I think that's to where it is right now. And I think for that, people need to be patient. And Gunnar obviously is a special player, and I am very, very high on Gunnar, and I think that his upside could even eclipse things that Adley can do offensively. And I know that could be a shocker. However, people need to understand when you come up and you're in a pennant or in a playoff race, he's going to have growing pains. And look what's been going on with Kyle Stowers. Stowers got off to a slow start and then had the big home run against the White Sox. You're going to have these growing pains in this situation. So you want to make sure whenever Gunnar does come up that he's going to try to play every day because his development at the end of the day is the most important thing. Right. And then two, expectations need to be need to temper expectations for him because he is a 21-year-old kid that is going to try to learn how to be a major league hitter.
Yeah. Well, and he's the Orioles. I believe he's their number 1 or number 2 ranked prospect now. And Grayson Rodriguez is, I can't remember. I think Grayson Rodriguez is number 2 now.
So Gunner's a number 1 overall prospect in some places in all of baseball.
Right.
And Grayson obviously speaks for himself. If Grayson's healthy, pitching's a little bit different in my mind where the consistency in that foundation, hitting's the thing that comes and goes, which I try to tell people. Pitching has to be on. Mm-hmm. Hitting, you have the ability to fail so much. Fail 70% of the time, you're one of the best players. So I hope that when the time comes for Gunnar, that people are excited, but people also understand that he's going to have growing pains, but he's going to turn out to be just fine.
Yeah, you got to temper those expectations and realize that there's going to be bumps in the road till he becomes that player that we expect him to be. Now, when I was mentioning Grayson, we just learned that he is scheduled to make a rehab start for Aberdeen on Thursday. Now, the thing is, by Thursday, if the Orioles plan to use Grayson Rodriguez at the Major League level, and then if they get to the postseason, use him then, he has to be added to the 40-man roster before Thursday. Is this a situation where you could see the Orioles adding him, then letting him pitch and rehab in the minor leagues and call him up probably the first couple of weeks of September? Or is it just going to be, you know what, we want to keep you down there, we're not going to add you to the roster, and then we'll bring you up next year when it's time?
I mean, honestly, I could see both ways. You know, I'm curious of how much Grayson will be ramped up. I'm sure that if the team continues to be in this race, which they're right in it, and I suspect them to be in the race until the end, whether they make it or not, it's going to be determined on how well the Orioles finish. And obviously, you know, the Mariners, Rays, and Blue Jays, minus the last weekend for the Blue Jays, all of them have been playing some pretty good baseball. So for Grayson, I think the time is, if he's healthy, you add him to the 40-man because you want to have that option. And look, what I was talking about, pitching, you have your nerves. That's why DL Hall got called up. You want your nerves to get out of your system. For Grayson, all he's done at every level has been so consistent. Now, I'm sure he would have those emotions and be anxious, but if you look at his body of work, he is so consistent with what he does. I think if he's healthy, you can plug and play him up in the major leagues, and he can definitely make an impact down the road. Only if he is fully healthy and ready to do so.
Now, is that a situation where you think that the Orioles more so use him out of the bullpen like they're going to do with DL Hall? Because then you have that filthy back end of your bullpen where you have Grayson Rodriguez, you have DL Hall, and you have Felix Bautista. And that kind of gives your bullpen a little bit of a breather. Do you envision that being the role if and when they do call him up?
You know, I don't know what Grayson or DL's role would be. And I think I want people to remember of how good the bullpen has been. So I don't think that they're going to supplant any of those guys. And I know that there's frustrations, but Joey Kriebel, I
Crable.
believe.
Yeah.
And I played against him, but Kriebel's had an unbelievable year. Going from being claimed by the team and going out the way he's pitched, and then Perez, Batista, those guys have earned the role and they've shown that they can handle those big situations. And I know that, but they're not perfect. They're not going to be on every night, unless you're Felix Batista, knocking on wood. He's been arguably could be the rookie of the year, but unfortunately, he probably won't win it. So I think it's a luxury. If you were able to add those guys to the pen, it gives you more flexibility. But I don't think it's going to necessarily change any roles in the back end of the bullpen.
Sure.
Ryan, sorry, I lost my timing. So last year with Norfolk, you played with several guys who have been big parts of the Orioles' success this year. And if you want to take this question in the direction of some prospects who are still in the minors, that's fine. But I'm curious, with player performance this year, what has surprised you, and what did you kind of see coming?
So I'm not surprised with any of the guys that have come up and had success. I think the biggest surprise, I'll first jump into team. I'm surprised of what's happened this year. I don't think that anyone was expecting this to happen so much. But again, this is what happens when you're pitching can keep you in games. And if you look at statistically, it's the pitching numbers that are so drastically different from a season ago, and defense, not so much the offense. And that's no knock to it. That's just the reality. You pitch and play defense, you're going to stay in games. So I think the pitchers and having some other names force their ways in. I think Nick Vesby's done a good job of breaking his way in. It's had solid moments, but again, he's a young pitcher. I think the most exciting thing for a lot of these guys is that in what's considered of being more of an inexperienced pitching staff, if you will, not a lot of experience in the majors, they have tremendously exceeded all those expectations. Felix Batista breaking with the team, arguably a top 5 closer in the major leagues now. You have Perez, who was a great pickup. Vespi, Kyle Bradish now has come and gone and figured it out. Dean Kramer got healthy and has found his groove the last 3 starts. So it's a combination. Then obviously there are more arms down below. I'm a huge believer in Mike Baumann, and I know him personally, but they have so many arms down there where I don't know if it's going to be this year, but they have so many things, and this is a good problem to have. The Tampa Bay Rays are the team that's done this so well the last X amount of years, is that they prepared whenever their guys were getting called up from AAA, especially in the pitching department, that they were ready to come up. It didn't matter the circumstances, they were prepared. And I think we're starting to see more of that from the Orioles pitchers that have had to come up from Norfolk to the bigs, and whether they've stayed longer or not, the moment's not too big for them and they're finding success. And I think that is going to be so vital to the team as they move past this rebuild part and hopefully into contending for years to come.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to circle back real quick and just point something out that came to mind talking about Grayson Rodriguez and postseason eligibility, whether or not he is ready to pitch in the majors by the time the season is over. I think it's worth noting that Shane McClanahan, who up until probably a week or so ago was a clear frontrunner for American League Cy Young, he made his major league debut in the playoffs against the New York Yankees just a couple years ago. So I don't know what his 40-man status was approaching September or coming into that season, but I think it's worth noting that we saw that with McClanahan, and now he's a stud. And who knows? Maybe it's wishful thinking, but we could see something like that with Grayson.
For sure. And again, it'd be a great problem to have to discuss. It'd be a great option to have Grayson. And a lot of teams have done that. I just wouldn't want people to expect it. It's so exciting when you hear these names and you've seen the talent and you know it's there. But again, this is uncharted waters for everyone. Long term, it's going to be they're going to be big pieces. Short term, be excited, but be understanding that players are going to have to try to figure things out. And obviously, uh, we've seen it happen where players can make their debuts in the postseason.
For sure. Now I have one more Orioles question for you, and then we'll close out with a little bit of rapid fire, kind of this or that type deal. But this is also inspired by a tweet that I saw the other day. If you could take one Orioles player and max out one of their tools, who would you choose? Which tool would you turn into an 80, and why? And then if you could answer that same question, but for one of the Orioles prospects.
Oh, so sorry. The one of the Orioles prospects that isn't on the team and one that is on the team.
Sure, whichever direction you want to take it. But I figured we go one and one.
Okay, this is interesting.
It's a tough question.
It's
I'll give you my answer if you need a second to
yeah.
think.
Let's.
I would give Jorge Mateo an 80 hit tool. I
Oh
think
wow.
that equates him to a Barry Larkin type player where he's getting on base enough to put up good stolen base numbers. Barry Larkin, I think his career on base percentage was around 370, hit close to 300. I think Mateo with an 80 hit would be an absolute force to be reckoned with.
Cedric Mullins with an 80 arm would
It's a
be.
good one.
It's like the
Oof.
one thing he's missing from his game. An 80 arm for Cedric Mullins, and that's a.
Yeah, that's tough. The Mateo one really speak. I wasn't thinking. 'Cause I was thinking of prospects, but Mateo would be Mateo and Mullins. Those are two guys, center field and shortstop, two of the most important positions in baseball. Obviously, catching is right up there. Those are the three. Mateo, if he was able to hit and what he's done this in the second half, if Mateo could get on base and hit around 300 and steal 20 to 30 bags a year or more, that's such an upside boost for him. So hitting's interesting for him. I gosh, that is because I was going to say this. Is there really much more to improve with Adley right now? I don't think there is. I was trying to think of more going on the pitching side
Yeah.
of there's a few like a guy who's on the team and you can't do that, but I would love if Nick Vespi had like an 80 fastball. I think he'd be the most. I think he'd be the most unhittable pitcher coming out of the pen because his off speed stuff is so deceptive. It's so hard to pick up, and you see it. But the thing is, he doesn't throw as hard as some of the. If he threw as hard as Perez did,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another he's like on a I know haters had issues, but he'd be on a Josh Hader even higher scope. So mine would probably be if coming out of the pen saying Vespi, 80 fastball, unhittable lefty. Good luck.
Did you get a chance to face Vespi at the alternate site?
I did not. So Vespi wasn't at the alternate site, and the great thing with him, I told Vespi was my teammate when I came to the Orioles in 17, and we started together down in extended spring training, played together for years, and they moved him from starter to reliever, back and forth, and he really then had to reinvent himself when they had him more out of the pen, and the 2021 season came around, and they were still trying to figure out essentially what you're going to do with him. They liked him, but they were trying to figure out who they have in everyone, but he definitely wasn't one of their priority guys, and he forced his way to being a priority guy. And then going into this year, same thing. It was you re-signed with the team, you got to invite the big league spring training, prove to us that you can be a part of this team moving forward. And he did. He dominated in the minors. So it's a really great story for him. Definition of don't have to be drafted high, but you work really hard to be consistent at what you need to be successful at. And, I couldn't be happy for him.
Awesome. Well, Paul, before I get into these rapid fire, did you have anything else you wanted to throw in here?
No, man. I mean, we pretty much covered it all. I'll leave Brandon Hyde alone. I'll leave him alone. We can move on.
We can get into that a little bit later. All right, so Ryan, before we let you go, I wanted to to fire off some non-baseball related, just rapid fire questions, give the fans a chance to get to know you a little bit. None of these are difficult. Well, there's a couple that might be a little complex,
Bring
and
it on.
but fun in a fun way. All right, we'll start easy. Pepsi or Coke?
Neither, actually. Not a big soda guy. Sorry to disappoint.
That's good
Okay,
though.
fair enough. Well, maybe you're not a breakfast guy either, but pancakes or
Oh,
waffles?
pancakes.
Okay. Movies or TV shows? I guess it
Movies.
depends on what they are. Okay.
It depends, but growing up it'd be movies. I could just throw it on, have it on the background, watch it all day.
Favorite movie?
Ooh. I loved Forrest Gump growing up. I felt like he could accomplish anything, and that's what I wanted to do.
Okay. You have a lot of experience doing traveling in the minors. Road trip or airplane?
Oh, well, road trip if it's under 5 hours, airplane if it's over.
Fair enough. I drove out to Arizona. I moved there a couple years ago, and it's a long drive. I definitely would have preferred a flight.
Have you ever driven to Rome, Georgia from Delmarva from Salisbury, 13 and a half hours? Wouldn't recommend it.
It does not sound fun.
Sounds awful.
College hoops or NBA?
College hoops.
Do you have a favorite team?
I want to see always the local teams do well, Maryland, Towson, but I have developed more connections with UNC. My girlfriend went there. One of my best friends went there, and the CU Buffaloes. My sister works out at Colorado.
Okay. College football or NFL?
NFL, Ravens all the way.
I know you're a big fantasy guy as well, right?
Absolutely. I love it. It's just so much fun. Um, and with the Ravens coming around, it's a great August if you're a Baltimore sports fan with the Orioles and Ravens.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. I have three more for you. They're a little more complex.
Let's go.
If you could communicate verbally with either pets or babies, which would you pick?
Pets.
I think that's a pretty obvious one, but I thought it was a
Yeah.
fun question.
But I'm afraid of what my pet would, if there was better communication, what would they think? What would I think? What would happen?
Right. If you could pause time or rewind time, which would you do?
Ooh, wow. How about that?
It's a deep one.
You gotta like really think about that because if you're gonna rewind it, do you rewind your age too, or just time, and you stay the same age?
Yeah, and that's the thing is it's like you hear all the things like I want to say rewind time for the sense of if you made mistakes, you can go back and learn it, but it's a part of the journey in life is that you have to learn from your mistakes. So I always kind of like that sentiment, even though I'd love to go back and fix my mistakes. Pausing the time would be cool to really cherish the moments. I think sometimes the great moments that you have can come and go, and it would be something to hold on to a little bit longer.
Okay, last one for you. You're replacing a roll of toilet paper. Does
Okay.
the flap go over or under? This is a big one for me.
So how did this come about of all the
You know,
questions?
I've had this debate with several people in the last few months of my life. It came up at a family function, and then it's been on my mind.
Okay, well,
Because there are people who have a strong opinion one way or the other, and then there are people who don't even pay attention to it and don't care.
I that's got for me. It's been down. I will say a place I live in right now. I just slide it on and off. But growing up, it was always down.
Okay.
Always down. I think. Were you an up guy?
I'm an over the top guy. I like to have my flap coming over so I can see where the perforation is and where to tear it and all that. But I understand this is a ridiculous talking point for a podcast. I just thought it was a fun question.
Oh, it's fun. Definitely haven't thought about that before.
So I heard something. I saw it on one of the social media platforms that it's the way that the toilet paper wants you to do over the top because it makes you take more and then you have to buy more. But the way to do it is underneath because you take less and you really only need less. I've always done over the top, but I heard that that's how you end up spending more money.
Well, obviously that's why I did under was to spend less money on toilet paper.
Yeah, you planned ahead.
Fascinating. Well, hey, I that might be my next party starter for when I'm trying to entertain some friends and family. So thank you for the questions.
Well, believe me, you will find people who have strong opinions one way or the other. You could go over under. You could talk about folding it or wadding it. There's a whole world of toilet paper conversation that's available out there if you want to go find it.
I'll just
All
leave it at
right.
this question. But
Yeah, God bless.
All right. Well, that is Ryan Ripken. We very much appreciate your time. I mentioned to you before the podcast, Paul and I were just going to go over a couple things, recapping the Houston series, talking about some of the minor league promotions we've seen this week. If you want to dip out, you're more than welcome to. We're happy if you stick around. It's really up to you. No harm, no foul either way. But we very much appreciate the time to answer some questions and dive into some Orioles baseball. And we wish you the best as you continue your newfound retirement journey.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I got to dip off, but guys, it's been a pleasure, and we'll be talking on Twitter, and hopefully we see a great end for the Orioles as they move into September.
And Ryan, just remember, if you're doing your fantasy draft, unless you're at the end of the first round, leave Run CMC alone. Leave him alone, man.
Hey, he was not taken last night, nor did I have the option to take him last night. So
Fair enough.
definitely gonna have more football talk as well, guys. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
All right, man.
All
Talk to you
right.
down
You
the
can
line.
follow him at Ryan Ripken. Thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
See you.
Easy. All right. That was an interview with Ryan Ripken, son of Cal Ripken Jr., of course, nephew to Billy, grandson to Cal Sr. You know the name if you're an Orioles fan. We very much appreciate his time to sit in with us and answer some questions.
Billy actually used to live across the street from me,
Did he?
and he came over to my house a couple times when I was a little boy for a Christmas party and a wine tasting. He was a lot of fun.
Oh, very nice. I didn't want to get into anything about, I've worked for Ripken Baseball a couple of different times. I've done the Chevy
Mm-hmm.
tour, and then I worked up at the complex during COVID. Um, but yeah, I mean, I never got to meet Cal or Billy, but Billy did hook our group up with tickets in a pretty nice tickets to a Cardinals Cubs game at Busch Stadium when we were out on the
Nice.
Chevy tour a few years ago. So
Nice.
shout out to Uncle Billy for that one.
Something I wanted to add, by the way, you're give an 80 grade tool to any player. 80 command for DL Hall.
Yeah,
If you had an 80 command for DL Hall, that's a dude that.
he's a 15-time Cy Young, I
Yeah.
would
Oh
think.
my God. Oh my God. 80
Yeah,
grade command. Woo.
I think that's a pretty easy answer. I mean, you look at a guy like DL Hall, and the big issue with him over the past several years with him in the farm has been the lack of command. So you throw an 80 on that, you've got an absolute stud. And who knows, some guys it just clicks at some point, and that could be the case with DL Hall. Obviously, we
Clicked
hope
for
it
Randy
is, but
Johnson and Jim Palmer and Nolan
absolutely,
Ryan.
yep, yeah. Randy Johnson's a big one for sure.
Yeah.
If DL Hall is in any way, shape, or form comparable to Randy Johnson, the Orioles have done something right.
Yep.
So, Paul, the Orioles took 2 out of 3 in Houston. We
Yeah.
talked about this a little bit. The offense scored a total of 6 runs. They scored in a total of 3 different innings out of 27. A lot of guys on base, but a huge inability to bring them home. I was away this weekend, so I wasn't watching much of the games. I was following them on my phone, and it felt like every time I went in to check what was happening, I saw that Cedric Mullins led off the game with a single, stole second base. Adley got on, and then we stranded him. And that seemed like a common theme throughout many innings in that Houston series. Um, Paul, it's a point we've hammered home before, and it's coming to fruition again. The Orioles need to figure out how to hit consistently with runners in scoring position.
Well, it was they had so many wasted opportunities in this series. You mentioned the Friday night game. I look at yesterday's game. You got look, they were talking about how good Verlander was yesterday in his 3 innings, and he left with a calf strain. But I think he's going to be all right. It was more of a precautionary thing. But they were talking on MLB Central this morning about how nasty he was. I thought the Orioles had him on the ropes yesterday. I've seen him look better. He got himself into trouble through a lot of pitches. He had 60 pitches through 3 innings. And he threw 28 pitches in that first inning, and the Orioles let him off the hook. Mullins reaches on that. It was originally ruled an error, and then it was changed to a single. Rutschman gets a single after Mullins steals second base. And I was like, how did Mullins not score from second on a base hit? And then I saw it because I was doing something else when he got the hit. And I saw it barely got over the infielder's head, so we had to wait to see that it dropped. So you have runners on first and third with nobody out, and then Santander strikes out. Mountcastle strikes out, one of the worst at bats of the year. And then Austin Hayes strikes out on a curveball that he missed by a solid 2 feet. And the thing about those 3 strikeouts, not only did they not put a ball in play with your 3, 4, 5 hitters, but they all struck out, and Verlander threw 5 pitches to the 3 of them that would have been called strikes had they not swung. So they got themselves out. And Mountcastle especially, he swung at a pitch that was so high for strike 3, it wasn't on the pitch tracker on the MLB app. That's
Are you
how
kidding
high,
me?
that's how high the pitch. The pitch that he swung at for strike 2, you could only see the bottom half of it at the top of the pitch track. The one they swung at for strike 3 isn't even on the screen. It's not there. That's
Good
how.
grief.
I mean, the pitch was like mouth high that he swung at, and these guys are getting themselves out, and a lot of times it seems like, I don't want to say the moment's too big for them because they're Major League Baseball players, right? And they're there for a reason. But it seems like they're just pressing so much. And it's the same thing that happened to them when Rasmussen took a perfect game into the 9th inning against him a couple of weeks ago. And that's not to take anything away from Rasmussen, but the Orioles, they had something like 6 different single-digit innings, pitches thrown by Rasmussen in different innings, because they were just way too aggressive and they were trying to do too much instead of just put a ball in play and work a count. And they really let Verlander off the hook. He could have walked all 3 of those guys, and you have runs that way. I know I'm rambling on again here. It's just they're way too aggressive in big situations, and it hurts them.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm glad you told me that because like I said, I didn't get a chance to watch much of the action. I was able to stream the last couple innings of Friday and Saturday night's games, but I was in the car on Sunday and I had no idea that Mountcastle was chasing pitches over his head. But it's
Santander's at bat wasn't much better. I actually posted after the at bat. It's like, I don't know if that was a good at bat by Santander or not, because he saw 7 pitches, he swung at all 7 pitches, and I think 2 of them were strikes. He fouled a bunch of pitches off, and the last 2 pitches he swung at were nowhere near the strike zone that he struck out on. And it's like, you saw 7 pitches, but you swung at like 6 balls.
for an organization that hammers the point home of making good swing decisions, they have not been great as of late.
Yeah.
Another thing from yesterday, Paul, Brandon Hyde goes to Brian Baker in the 7th inning. Game was tied 0-0, runner on first base. Kyle Tucker coming up. Dylan Tate and Cionel Perez both available after sharing in 1 inning on Friday night. Neither threw a bunch of pitches. Tate threw, I think he struck out Mancini on 3 pitches to end that game.
Mm-hmm.
Felix Bautista had pitched an inning and a third for the save on Saturday, but I think he only threw about 15 or 16 pitches in that outing as well. So you've got a fresh bullpen and off day on Monday. The decision to go to Brian Baker there, I simply don't understand.
I don't understand how Brian Baker and Joey Crable have been your relievers that have struggled the most in the last month, and they're the first 2 options with everybody pretty rested. And so I'm with you on that. And look, Brian Baker, the stuff is there, right? The stuff is there, but his issue, just like DL Hall, is a lack of command. And we continue to see him come into these games. I think that's the 6th time since the end of July that he's come into a game where the Orioles had a 1-run lead, or they were tied, or they were down by a run, and he came in, walked the first hitter, and then gave up a base hit. And at what point does Brandon Hyde say, all right, man, I can't keep putting you into these situations. I can't use you here. Dylan Tate, and especially when he comes in and the first batter that he faces is Kyle Tucker, and he immediately falls behind him 3-1. Kyle Tucker's a left-handed hitter, and I don't know what his splits are, but you have Cionel Perez rested, who's warming in the bullpen. How do you not bring in Perez to face Kyle Tucker there? You need that big out. Now, look, people are right when they say the Orioles didn't score runs. That's not on the pitching staff. It's on the Orioles. Right. I mean, they lost that game yesterday 3-1. 3 runs, you should win that ball game. But when you're in a situation where they haven't scored any runs either, bring in the guy who are best suited. Maybe one day Brian Baker figures out the command issues, figures out how to throw strike 1, and he's not putting you in a tough situation. But he hasn't proven to do that yet. So using Baker there with the rest of the bullpen, there's just no explanation for it. I went off. I said yesterday on Twitter that Brandon Hyde couldn't justify a punt lineup yesterday, so we decided he had to mess it up by bringing in Baker and Crable as his first two relief options. And I've been really hard on Hyde, and maybe he does need a little bit more experience and deserves to get the opportunity to have that experience. But these are moves to me that you can't justify when you have better arms in the pen ready to go.
I'm with you. And Kyle Tucker, by the way, 891 OPS against right-handed pitching, 676 against lefties.
Why is
So
Baker the guy there? Why is
it
Baker the guy there?
it doesn't make sense. I was stuck in traffic at the time, so I was able to fire off a tweet about how confused I was with that decision.
Mm-hmm.
I simply do not understand it. But let's move on to something a little happier.
Yeah,
We've got some
and
promotion.
they won the series. Like nobody's
Yes. Oh
disappointed
yeah.
about. Like they lost that game yesterday, and the reason that people are upset with the loss is because it was a winnable game. You're going up
Right.
against Verlander. You have him on the ropes, and you don't break through against him. The bullpen decisions were questionable at best, in our opinion, and it was a winnable game. We're very happy that they went into Houston and took 2 or 3. That's freaking awesome. They've won 4 straight series and 7 of 8, right? Like that's awesome. But you had an opportunity to sweep, and it's the same reason we were upset that they didn't sweep the Blue Jays with that lineup that Hyde put out a couple of weeks ago. You have an opportunity to win these games, and you need to win every game that you can. That's a game that's winnable yesterday, and that's why we're upset. We're not, looking a gift horse in the mouth because they didn't sweep when they took 2 out of 3.
Right. If you tell any of us on Friday morning that the Orioles are about to take 2 or 3 in Houston against the best team in the American League with spectacular starting pitching, yeah, you're over the moon thrilled with that
Yeah,
result. It always just it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth when you have a chance to sweep and you throw it away like that. But nonetheless, a successful series again. Um, you have to be thrilled with that result. Very exciting that the Orioles are able to hang with a team like the Houston Astros. And you move on and you live and you learn, and you hope to take the next series in Cleveland. It's a 3-game set starting on Tuesday. That comes before a 10-game homestand.
that's going to be a tough series because they got Cal Quantrill in Game 1, they got Tristan McKenzie in Game 2, and then Shane Bieber in Game 3. So it could be another. Hopefully, they can win 2 or 3 like they did in Houston, because they're going to need to get the pitching because the bats. Yeah, I'm nervous. The bats, this offensive slumber could continue.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, they're able to steal at least a game or two in Cleveland, stay in the thick of the wild card hunt. Cleveland leads the AL Central by a couple games at this point, but a series that the Orioles need to go in and not falter, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Better news, Paul. Minor league promotions that we've seen roll
Mm-hmm.
in on Monday morning. Colton Cowser and Joey Ortiz both getting promoted from AA Bowie to AAA Norfolk. Daryl Hernandez promoted to Bowie from Aberdeen. Judd Fabian promoted to Aberdeen after just 14 games, where he is OPSing over 1,300 in his professional career so far. And the big news, which we talked about a little bit with Ryan, Grayson Rodriguez scheduled to rehab at Aberdeen on Thursday. Paul, the big thing that stands out to me here is there has to be a corresponding move from Norfolk. They have 8 active infielders as it stands now after the Joey Ortiz promotion. Do, I don't we don't have an answer to this question, but do we see Gunnar? Do we see Jordan Westberg? Do we see, I don't know, DJ Stewart? What are they planning here? What do you think?
You would assume it would be Gunnar. Um, and I'm just thinking about this right now. I could see the Orioles adding Gunnar to the 40 man, but not calling him up tomorrow. Adding it because you got like those 3 pitchers I just mentioned in Cleveland. Then they go home and they have 3 games against the A's over the weekend. And you could see a Gunnar Henderson promotion on Friday, get some fans out into the stands and give him an opportunity to debut against a lesser team and get his feet under him. There's going to be a corresponding move tomorrow, I would imagine, because like you said, they have 8 infielders. Maybe it's I don't even know. Like I said, you're thinking it's Gunnar, but if it's not, that wouldn't surprise me either. Or
Right.
maybe they just hang on to him for a little bit. Right now, the way that they've operated tells me that Gunner's no lock to be here tomorrow. Like he's
Right.
no lock. So
Every day we've expected the call up to happen, it has not happened. And that's been the case with every prospect this season. Every
mhm.
time us fans on Twitter are clamoring for a certain guy, it's never the day we hope. I bought tickets to what I thought was going to be Adley Rutschman's debut several
Me
times
too.
before it actually happened, and I'll probably do the same with Gunnar Henderson if he's not up by the beginning of this upcoming homestand. 10-game homestand starting after the series in
And
Cleveland.
it's a big one because after you got 3 against Oakland, and honestly I think you need to find a way to sweep that series.
I think
Then
so
you
too.
then you got 4 against Toronto and 3 against Boston. Those are all games that are going to have a serious say in playoff seeding and if you can get in. So they need to do some work here on this homestand.
Let me ask you this, Paul. If you think so, right now I don't know the answer to this question. Is the Orioles 40 man still at 39 players, or is it at 40? Do you know?
No, because I can't remember who
Oh,
they
they claimed
added.
Phoenix Sanders. I think
Right.
that made it
Yeah.
40.
Yeah, that made it 40. So you've got a couple of guys you could DFA Arauz. Nevin would be the move to bring down to bring somebody else up. Um, but you have to DFA some guys. I don't have the 40-man roster in front of me. I can pull that up.
There are a few possibilities. I mean,
Right. There's always a few possibilities,
I
right?
think Arauz is definitely a prime candidate for that. I don't see them DFAing Tyler Nevin quite yet.
Well, no, they would option him
They
to
would
bring
option
up.
him, right?
Right.
But to clear a spot on the 40, there's a few pitchers that are kind of fringe 4A guys who I could see going. Travis Lakin Sr. is coming back on rehab. I don't think he has a role on this team. I could see him being the odd man out.
Keegan Aiken could be a guy DFA'd. He
It's
has not been
possible.
he hasn't been good since May. And you've got DL Hall coming up basically to take that spot for him. I could 100% see him being DFA'd. Rico Garcia is another guy. Lewis Head. Those are some guys that you really don't see a fit. Denji Reyes. Those are guys that you don't really see a fit for. And then as far as position players are concerned, I think Arauz is a prime candidate. Yasniel Diaz is a huge candidate to be DFA'd. He's a huge candidate to be a DFA. So they have some options. They have some guys that probably don't figure into what they're trying to do that they can DFA and probably sneak them through and keep them in the organization. So it's one of those things. It's this whole season. What I have learned, and this includes all the beat writers, all the sports talk radio hosts, all the TV show hosts. When it comes to prospects, nobody knows anything that's not named Mike Elias. Nobody knows anything. So we're always in a wait and see approach here.
Yeah, he keeps things very close to the chest. It's frustrating as fans, but I'm sure he has his process, as we all know he do. I just pulled up the banner on the bottom of the screen with the standings. I forgot to do that at the beginning of the show. I'm trying to figure out getting Ryan in here and all the tech stuff I'm still working on. I think I need to hire a producer to handle the StreamYard while I just talk. I think that's the way to do this.
Yeah, you
Uh,
can use that new sponsor money that you
yeah,
got.
we're gonna have some
So
T-shirts up there. I have to text Freddie who did the logo for us and make sure that's cool with him before we start, selling. Obviously, I'll offer him royalties on that. But yeah, hopefully we'll have a Give That Fan a Podcast T-shirt available at birdlandstore.com. Remember, you can use promo code ThatFan for 20% off your purchase. Paul, that's going to be a wrap for episode 19.
well,
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I
Go ahead.
I no I do want to. We didn't really talk too much about the Colton Cowser and Joey Ortiz promotions.
Oh, right. Let's
And
do it.
I do want to talk about that because Colton Cowser, he was hitting 258 at high A. They promoted him to double A anyway, and all he did was go up there and hit 352 with 10 home runs in 49 games and OPS off the charts. Joey Ortiz, the glove. When I was doing Glenn Clark Radio earlier this year, I think we had Keith Law on the show, and he said Joey Ortiz he thought would be the Orioles starting shortstop by midseason because that glove is that special. And the bat, he's hit 355 since July. So he deserved the promotion up there too. Like you said, they now have 8 infielders on that roster there in Norfolk. But these are guys. Ortiz, I don't know that he'll ever be more than a utility guy, but Colton Cowser is a guy who I think if they called him up to the majors right now, could hold his own with his hit tool and his selectivity at the plate. That's a guy I think that he could come to the majors right now and be successful. And I think he has a huge chance to make the Orioles opening day, maybe not opening day roster next year, to be a part of the Orioles for a bulk of the season next year.
I think so too, and I can certainly attest to Keith Law being a massive Joey Ortiz fan. He was on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast a couple years ago. Big fan of Joey Ortiz. I had him on. You know what I need to do, Paul? I need to get Buster Olney on this show because I think that's just kind of what I do. I got Keith Law on the podcast when he had released his farm system rankings and had the Orioles outside the top 10 when everywhere else they were consensus top 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get Buster on and just kind of pick his brain and see how he is adjusted to the Orioles' success this season. I know he gets berated on Twitter with just about every tweet. Uh, I might reach out to him again because I did before and I didn't hear back, but maybe we'll try one more time.
I've, as unbelievable as it may seem, I've kind of let Buster alone most of
Oh,
this year
yeah,
because
I kind of don't care anymore.
yeah, it's look, it's for clicks. And he gets those clicks, and his opinion is still the same. He's probably happy for Orioles fans that the Orioles are playing so well, but he's probably pissed off that they have such a low payroll and they're playing so well because
Oh yeah,
it goes against what he believes, you know. And he's not wrong. Tanking is bad for baseball. It may be good for that particular team, but it is bad for baseball. We just hate it that he says it because it's about the Orioles. He's saying it about the Orioles, but I'm done with the whole. Hey Buster, are the Orioles still bad for baseball at 8 games above 500 or wherever they are? Like, whatever, man. He doesn't care what you think. Like
right.
he's Buster only. He doesn't give two flying s's about what we think. So
Yeah, he
I
doesn't
think
need to.
I think it'd be fun to have him on the show and get his actual thoughts on what's going on here.
Yeah, we'll see. It might be a little bit of a dream at this point, but we'll see what happens. Um, I don't mean to gloss over my notes. Am I forgetting anything? Or I'm a little jumbled because I had my notes for the interview and then.
No, man, I think we pretty much touched on everything. I do think that we need to be prepared for not being Gunner called up tomorrow just because of who they're facing in Cleveland for 3 days. I think that if they do call him up, it's more likely to be Friday when he can have a better chance to get his feet under him. But other than that, man, I think we even touched on that. So I'm pretty redundant. I've realized. So
So I think I am too. It's something I need to work on. I also need to work on not saying between thoughts because I do that all the time. And when I
mm,
first started the podcast, I would go back in Audacity, download the audio, and edit out every time I mumbled before a new thought. I don't
wow,
have the energy for that anymore.
who does?
So it's a change I need to make within myself where I have to think about not using filler language
My
when
mom
I'm
got
transitioning between thoughts.
God bless her. She tunes in for most of my shows. And she at a point was telling me, "You're saying way too much." And so my mom is the one who really hammered it home for me, so that I would, and I probably still say it too much, but I've gotten a lot better. It used to be between every thought, so it's hard, man, because we do it in normal conversation too. So
Exactly. Well, to your mom, I apologize if my use of is frustrating to you. I will try to hone it in a little bit and do better. That's
you're
gonna.
doing fine.
I see. I just did it again. That's going to be a wrap for episode 19 of Give That Fan a Podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link will be in the description. We need to hit 100 followers at some point on YouTube. We'll be posting every episode from here on out on that channel. Thank you again to Ryan Ripken for joining the podcast this afternoon. Thank you, as always, to Derek and Tony at Utah Street Report for hosting the pod. We'll see you next week on
Go
Give That Fan.
subscribe.
Yes, please. See you next week on Give That Fan a Podcast.